Well, I have a photograph in front of me. In fact, I decided to do it with photographs, deliberately so. Steve's account of his own personal myth, obviously very personal to him, and he has a very good raconteur anyway, has an absolutely excellent memory for dates and so on. I'm probably less so, you'll have to forgive me if I rely on some photographs to prompt me to do it. And the first one I have is it's a picture of my mum as a baby being held by her mother, so my maternal grandmother, and it's a photograph that I've had a long time. We've had it up in our.
Oh, we have a large.
We have a larger version of it, which was up in our which was in our living room.
Yeah.
On the fireplace, so it was kind of central to the living room, and it kind of sums up that matrilineal line and those things obviously that have been passed down through my grandmother and my mother to me. And because it's such a strong image, it brings up all sorts of memories, really. I mean, the two women they couldn't have been more different women, could they?
No.
My grandmother and my own personal mother. Almost to the point that you wouldn't think that they were related necessarily.
She's more like you, wasn't she?
Yes.
Your grandmother was much more like Pauline.
I think so. Certainly in terms of, not necessarily in terms of temperament, but she was strong in ways that my own personal mother wasn't strong. And so in that regard, far more of an inspiration for me. And she was the person that actually I turned to when we were having difficulties with my family, when we got together, and before we got married. When my own personal mother kind of turned against me and turned against us and our relationship.
She adopted me, didn't she? In effect,
she did.
As her own grandson,
She did. Yes, she did. And my own personal mother, or my own mother, would have probably said that she was cold and hard and difficult to get on with, somewhat remote emotionally, but we never found her to be that way at all.
No.
She was a tough woman, there's no doubt about that, and she went through an awful lot of things in her life. But I would not have said that she was cold or unreceptive or unfeeling, but then obviously everyone's entitled to their own perspective on things. And she was probably, would you agree she was a matriarch probably of the family?
Yeah, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah. My mother had a younger sister, Anne, as well, who was, I think of her obviously in this sort of grouping of women, but she was very much a lady. She was a career woman, which was probably, let's say, quite unusual for the times in which she lived. She lost her husband early on in life, and obviously she invested, after his death, a lot of her energy into her career, and she went back to the family home and she lived with my grandmother and my grandfather for the rest of her days. In fact, my grandmother actually outlived her as well, which was a very sad situation. I don't know whether this is too grim to talk about really, but she died of cancer, and my grandmother actually lay with her as she died, which I guess any good mother would do. And that's a very moving thing, really.
It is. Very moving.
So for someone who was supposed to be cold and remote and unfeeling, that doesn't
no, they weren't like
feel
that
way to me.
They weren't like that, either of them.
No.
They were, my impression of them, bearing in mind that they had a jewellery business, they were wealthy, refined in manner, genuine English middle class from the early 1900s through to when your Auntie Anne was born, which would have been in the 1930s.
Yeah.
They had all of those values and they expressed them. They had that solidity, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
The issue was your father, but never mind. I'm sure you'll come to that.
Yeah, he's another story really, and his background was very, very different to my mum's.
Yeah, very.
He came from a large family. There were 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and in terms of, I mean, they weren't wealthy.
No,
they weren't wealthy
no.
people.
They were bog standard working class in terms of their background.
Yes.
They were decent people.
They were very decent
in terms
people.
of their expressed morality.
Yeah.
They weren't criminals or anything like that. They were decent working class, but basic working class, hard working.
Yeah.
Many of them improved themselves, didn't they, significantly?
Yes,
I would say
they did. I think the thing that was evident to me as a young girl growing up was the difference. Was the polarity between the 2 backgrounds, and you know, my mum and my dad in that regard came from very, very different backgrounds, and that in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem for people, but I think it was for them. And they didn't really have anything else to bond them, particularly that was obvious.
No.
I mean, it wasn't as if they shared the same values, particularly even. And you know, I can remember my mum, even as a girl, talking to other people that she knew and saying, well, when she married my dad, well, I've made my bed, I'm going to lie in it. And that kind of sealed her fate for the rest of her days, unfortunately. But that was the choice that she made. But the takeaway for me with respect to my grandmother, I think, is that she stands out. She stands out in an inspirational sense, because she went through so much.
She did.
And I would look to her, sadly not to my own mother in the same way, for inspiration.
Well, she supported us immediately from the get-go.
Yes.
Pauline was only 16. Am I
not at all.
Inappropriately
not
interjecting
at all.
here? And we got engaged when Pauline was 16. Everybody knew except her dad. But the person who coordinated the remainder of the family with respect to them not being a problem about that was Nan, wasn't it?
Yes,
it was your Nan.
Absolutely, yes.
She'd wave a walking stick like it was a parliamentary mace, and all the decisions would be thus made.
Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, she had a strength to her. My mum, in many ways, I think, was probably more like her father.
Yeah.
And he was quite an interesting man in some ways. He was going to go into the clergy, but never managed it for whatever reason. And I think, as you've said, Steve, they had their own business, their own jewellery business, and he was quite a quiet sort of gentleman in many ways, but weak with it, unfortunately. And I think my mum turned to him and away from her own mother because she felt closer to him. Maybe she just felt it was easier, the relationship with him was easier. It's hard to say, but I don't think it did her any good, really. I think it left a kind of lasting vulnerability, a lasting weakness in her, and probably made it difficult in the relationship that she had with my dad as well, because he was, like you say, came from a tough working class background. He was a fireman by occupation, and so very, very, very different men, but he brought something else to the equation that maybe she never fully valued, and that may have accounted for a lot of the difficulties between them as well. That he was, in some ways, although he was a very authoritarian man, he was nonetheless a man's man.
He was, yeah, he was. But he underperformed, didn't he, compared to his brothers? I mean, one of the other brothers was a fireman, but he ended up the chief fire officer in Hong Kong.
He did.
He was like at the very top level.
Yes, he did.
I think one of the things
Yeah.
that bonded them was that they were Roman Catholic, weren't they? They had that
Yes,
background.
there was that.
So there wasn't a religious issue between them. But your nan used to like motorsport.
Oh, she did?
She'd be off down the country lanes in
Yes.
British racing green sports cars and
Yes.
that kind of thing. She was quite an adventurer, wasn't she?
She was.
And a flapper and a model as well.
She was a photographer's model, wasn't she?
Yeah, in the 1920s.
We've got some quite interesting
We have.
photographs
Yeah,
of
we
her.
have.
Yeah. I mean, we've even got a photograph of her because she was born and raised in Lymm in Cheshire.
Yeah.
And there's even some beautiful photographs of her in the May Day parade.
Yeah.
And you can see her on the carriage going through Lymm as a little girl, involved in the May Day celebration. So she grew up in the countryside.
She did.
The Cheshire countryside, and she had that in her background as well. Yeah, an interesting lady in many ways.
She lost her foot. It was sewn back on
She
in
did.
a car crash in a sports car. Hit a tractor or something coming the other way, and the accelerator pedal, or one of the pedals anyway, apparently sliced her foot off.
Yeah.
And it was stitched back on. And she had a walking stick for the rest of her life, but she would not let that get in her way, would she, at all?
No.
Yeah.
No, she wouldn't. Well, she actually introduced us to John Cain as well,
Yeah.
because it was as a result of that injury that she went to see him, and she would always wear a photograph of his face in her stocking over the foot, over the site of the injury. Yes, and the foot that had been reattached. But I always remember her telling us the story of the doctor who decided to do that, because the general advice at the time was that she should lose that foot, she should just have it amputated, and it was an Indian doctor who said no, we're going to try and reattach it for you, because she was a relatively young woman at the time, and it certainly didn't stop her, did it?
No.
She made a good recovery from that, albeit that she had to walk with a stick.
Yeah, she impressed me as having vision. She could see the way things were going to go, and would then try and arrange people to arrive at that destination that her vision had. And it was nice. It was nice that she believed in us as well, as much as she did.
Yeah. And then the night that I walked out when I was 16, I went to John Cain's first, and then to her home.
Yeah.
And I guess she stood up for us. She advocated for us.
Oh, she did.
Against her own daughter, really.
Yeah, she did. She did.
So I'm grateful for that. I'll always be grateful for that. Right, the next photograph I have to hand is a photograph of my mum with me as a baby. So next generation on. And I've chosen it because, well, we're both smiling in the photograph. My mum used to say that I was, it sounds a bit silly saying this, but I was a sunshine baby, and that I would wake up smiling and singing every day. And that, I guess, the photograph really sums that up, I think. I'm not so sure about my mum's smile, about the integrity of that, to be honest with you. But certainly my own memories, those very early memories of that time, would have been of just the joy of being alive. That's something that's very clear to me. Just a love of life, of every day, of embracing every day, and just feeling how good it was to be alive. That's probably the best way I can put it. And I have another memory too of my mum's father, my maternal grandfather, of being in Port Sunlight, which is a very beautiful local village.
It is.
And there's some very sort of ornate gardens. They're beautiful gardens, and I have a very clear memory of it being a beautiful sunny day. I think there were other family members there, but I don't particularly remember them now. But they were there in the background, and running through the gardens, bright sunshine, beautiful flowers, and just running towards him and into his arms. And again, it's just another memory that connects to the one that is brought up by this particular photograph, which is just that love of life, that connection to people, just the sheer joy of being alive, and embracing the sunshine, embracing the environment, just appreciation for little things. And I think I've always had that goes right back to these early memories, and has persisted over time, I would say.
Is that your sensing and your feeling, do you think?
Yes, I think absolutely it is. Absolutely, because those sense impressions, the colour, the intensity of the light, the emotional content, the joy, the connection to people, I think it really defines us. Yeah. Even then, in those earliest memories, it was clearly there. Yeah. And it's only in retrospect you can look back and give it a name, isn't it? Yeah. But no, it was there at the beginning. Yeah. Most definitely. Yeah. That has persisted. I could not give those things up. No. They're too fundamental.
You haven't done?
No, I haven't done. No. I don't think I have. No, I mean, they may have been attenuated along the way, because, you know, as you collide with life and you grow up and you get older, you meet with all sorts of difficulties that impact on that basic orientation. They're bound to. But I've always fought to get them back again, to get that equilibrium back whenever I've been challenged by things. But yes, they were definitely there at the beginning. And another memory, strangely, in Port Sunlight, and I would be, again, probably just a young baby in a pram, probably sitting up, so I would say probably 6 months onwards, somewhere around there. And I remember my sister being there. She's 4.5 years older than me, and her friend, who may have been a little bit older again. And the friend was pushing me in the pram, and I can remember the dark green of the canopy, of the interior of it. So again, there's that connection to colour for me, which seems to be very important. And I remember feeling that I didn't want this girl to push me in the pram, that I was irritated by it. I would have preferred my sister, but she was probably a little bit too young to be tasked with that. And or my mum, I presume my mum was somewhere in the background. But but I found that really disagreeable, which is a kind of a feeling thing again, of either finding something agreeable or disagreeable. It's very much a feeling value, isn't it? And an extroverted one at that connection to the people around you. So those things really stand out. And probably the next few that I have are very much connected to early childhood, I would say, sort of preschool, and then starting in infant school, and my love of dance coming through. And I can remember pestering my mum to let me join the local dance school, which in those days I think was quite expensive, so it was something she wanted to be certain that I wanted to do. She wasn't going to spend any money on me if I wasn't serious about it, but I was. And I can remember putting a lot of pressure on her to let me do it, and obviously she acquiesced in the end, and I did join, and I absolutely loved it. We do regular exams in dance, and we put on shows at a local theatre, stage productions, and I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. And again, that's something that's probably stayed with me all my life as well, is a love of dance, even though I reached a point where I wasn't able to pursue it myself anymore, which was, I think, probably about the age of 10, 11.
Well, you were being pushed to try for the Royal Ballet, weren't you?
Well, I was. I had an opportunity to do it.
She won all sorts of awards, and she was really, really doing well, and your mum wouldn't have wanted you to do it regardless, no. So it was going to be stopped, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
That was a real repression on your drive and on your instincts and on the essential spirit of you as a person. Yeah. All of that was affected because throughout your life, for as long as she lived, she was attempting to suppress you and appropriate you to her needs.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it happens so often, doesn't it?
It does. And I think you often say, Steve, too, don't you, about the effect of parental complexes, that the children actually suffer more from them.
Yeah.
That they absorb so much from the environment that they grow up in.
Yeah.
That if they do develop a particular complex, it tends to be worse than it was for the actual parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a time I took on her agoraphobia.
Yes. Yeah. She had the agoraphobia.
She had the agoraphobia.
And, she suggested to Pauline that she couldn't travel because
Yes.
that would mean that you would be away from her.
That's right.
And that was sorted out later, wasn't
Yeah.
it? We sorted that out.
We did, yes.
But it persisted for that long until I met you, which is when you was, I met you when you were just past 15, weren't you?
Yeah.
But when we got together, you were 16, and we sorted it out then,
We did.
along with a few other things, through our relationship.
Yes, yes. But it was so strong in me that I felt, I think as you rightly say, Steve, that I couldn't travel. I couldn't stay in strange places. So we'd gone family holidays and they've been an absolute nightmare, in so much as I couldn't wait to get home again.
Yeah.
And also with respect to the dancing, it was so deeply ingrained in me that if I was to receive and take up a place at the Royal Ballet School, for example, I wouldn't be able to hack it because I wouldn't be able to stay away from home. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So even if I had the talent to pursue that, I would be brought back into the family fold very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And that kept me there. It kept me there as a go-between.
It did. Between your
And
parents.
between my parents. And I was kind of there to keep the stability for the family, the relationships between everyone, and to contribute to the sort of the harmony, the harmonious nature of things within the home, because things were often conflicted.
Yeah.
And you know, that was why I was there. That for them, that was my role.
Well, they were utilising your extroverted feeling
very much so
to mediate. That was clear.
Yeah.
And other things I know because I wasn't there when she was very small. I heard all the stories from her friends in the street that, you know, if someone hurt themselves out in the street, Pauline would be out there administering first aid. You know, so she had this caring nature, and her mum and dad were very, very different, and they were using her to keep the family,
keep the marriage together, and the family as a whole.
To keep the marriage together, to maintain its persona. So her own essential spirit had to be nurtured, but only up to the point where it didn't threaten that stability.
Yes.
But that essential spirit was there. It was indefatigable. It didn't go away.
No.
It wasn't beaten.
No.
Just had to wait that moment where you could express it and become yourself.
Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely true. I mean, you're right to say I would be first out with the plasters. Yeah. If a little boy fell in the street, or you know, someone was hurt, I wanted to help out in any way I could. And you know, even sort of my toys would all be lined up at night. They all had to be put to bed. All the teddies and the dolls, it didn't matter who they were. They all had to be treated in the same way. There had to be a sense of fairness about what their needs might be as dolls and teddies and so on.
That's extroverted feeling,
which is the
isn't
extroverted
it? You can see how strong a trait that was and is in your character.
Yes, yeah. If that were to go, as we often say to people, I would cease to be me.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, as it is for all of us, whatever our dominant function is, and there is a downside to that, of course. There is, and I have to manage that as best I can. But it's something that if I gave up, I would cease to exist. I would be someone completely different.
You would. You'd be like your sister.
Yes.
Who is very different to you.
Who?
Every imaginable way.
Who is another subject altogether, really. Yeah, very, very different. As I think I said earlier, 4.5 years age difference between us, and she was much quieter, more concrete, I would say.
ISTJ.
Yes,
we
typologically.
Yes, ISTJ.
Yeah, closer to my dad.
Very.
In terms of style, and I think that they were in a close identification with one another, weren't they? Really, yeah. I think when I came along, they probably wanted, or my dad certainly wanted a son, and I think that's probably even where I get my name from. He was probably hoping I would be Paul, and I was Pauline in the end. But he would buy me tractors and train sets and robots. and all things mechanical.
Yeah.
And, you know, it tells you something, doesn't it, about a person's expectation. I mean, I think even with respect to your own family, Steve, they had a pink cot for you, didn't they?
Oh, yes, they did, yeah.
If I remember correctly.
They did, yeah. And they denied that they were hoping I'd be a girl. But my mum told me what my name would be had I been one.
Yes.
And when Gareth, who took over my parents' house for about a year, when I was clearing that out, I found the pink cot in the loft. It was still there.
Yes, it was.
The ghost of the girl who never was. Yeah.
And what would your name have been, out of interest?
I'm not going to say that publicly. I can't, actually. I can't.
Yeah. But the funny things, names, aren't they? Because my dad had different names lined up for me and my sister than my mum did. My mum went out in the end, actually.
Right.
But we would have been Julie and Jane, strangely enough, James, had that happened, had he got his way on it. But she asserted herself over that, which is probably one of the few times she asserted herself at all in a married life, but she did on that. And anyway, Paul became Pauline, and he didn't get the son that he wanted, unfortunately.
Yeah. He could have had a son-in-law too, but he didn't like me.
No.
That's another story.
No, well, but it's an interesting part of the story, Steve, because in relation to my sister, he tended to encourage bad boys. He was happy for her to have relationships to bad boys, and almost revelled in it.
Yeah.
But then someone like yourself comes along, a decent man with proper values and a profession, a job, an occupation, and a home already to bring his youngest daughter into, and he didn't like it.
No.
And it's like, how bizarre is that?
Yeah.
Really, really bizarre. So I'm probably just thinking now about some of my school memories. I think I mentioned earlier that I love school, certainly infant school. Even the first day, that was no problem. It was just a joy to go out into the world and make friends and to share experiences, and I loved learning and did well educationally, I would say, around that age. The difficulties came later, moving from infant school to junior school, where I went to a school which is a little bit out of area, so it was it felt a long way from home as well, and in those days I would either catch a bus myself to go, or sometimes even walk there and walk home. And it was, as probably for a lot of children, quite a step up. And sadly, my memories of those days aren't very good, because whilst I was encouraged in school to do well, and I did do well and started to excel at art in particular, and I would get a lot of positive feedback from teachers about my work, that sadly rubbed a lot of other children who, the surrounding area of the school was quite a deprived area, so we had some children there who were from the local orphanage, and that created problems of envy and jealousy, some of the positive feedback that I was getting from teachers. And there was a period of time, quite an extensive period of time, where I was bullied, and I would be followed home from school, and it was a combination of verbal and physical abuse that became very unpleasant, and it took me a long time to share that even with my family, with my mum and dad. And my dad was really quite matter of fact about it. It was more a case of really, you just need to toughen up. No sort of help with how to do that, how to go about that, but simply that I should, maybe assert myself, stick up for myself more.
Was it then that he said about growing a thicker skin? You need to be thicker skinned, and then the psoriasis started? That's right, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
I think the psoriasis came a bit later, but the suggestion took at that time. And I can remember I was sat at the dining room table with him when he said it, and he was busy doing something else, and there was no relating, there was no warmth, there was no compassion, nothing from him at all. And I can even remember what I was eating. It was bowl of vegetable soup, and crying into my soup and thinking, that's just so unhelpful. Anyway, that persisted, and eventually, because it was a Catholic school, a meeting was arranged with some of the priests attached to the church. They weren't teaching in the school, but they were attached to the church, it being a Catholic school. And they supported the bullies, unfortunately for me. And it took the headmaster at the time, when he was eventually involved, to kind of say, well, we'll have to try and put a stop to this. But they didn't really do anything of any worth that had any real results to it. And I think that created a lot of problems for me. It probably meant that when I was faced with difficulties later in life, challenges later in life, that I then had a tendency probably towards displacement. Because I can remember standing in the queue for the canteen. It was like an outside canteen. You probably remember it, Steve, because you even as a policeman, you patrolled the area.
Yeah.
And so you would have been familiar with it, because it's still standing now, and the actual
St. John's,
the actual canteen, which was like a long wooden hut almost structure, would have still been in place then. And we'd queue up in the playground for that. And I almost found a way, if you like, even at that young age, of distracting myself into, I wonder if the cutlery will be clean today, or I wonder what's on the menu. Just little things like that. But I think for me now, as I look back over many, many years, that was the beginning of a displacement.
Yeah.
And I think when I was then challenged by other things later in life, I tended to fall back on that in different ways, obviously not in the same way I did then. But I think that set the wheels in motion for that particular form of adaptation to outer difficulties. So, like I say, not a good time. And eventually I think my mum and dad got the message and realised that I couldn't go on like that, because I started to refuse to go to school. I stopped eating. I was obviously depressed, obviously so, again looking back now. And I can remember the bleakness of that time, of the depersonalisation, feelings of derealisation with respect to my environment. Of course I didn't have that language for it in those days, but nonetheless that was there. And that life force, that energy, that love of life just ducted back in to me and became quite a profound depression. And it was then and only then that they decided that they had to act. And there was they put me in for the entrance exam for the local prep school.
For convent.
For the convent prep school. And 100 girls sat the exam for it, and I came first in the exam. And I can remember my father, telling me, you've got a place and you've come first. And he was shocked. It was like, how did you manage that? Not, that's fantastic, that's really well done, and this is going to be a good start for you, new start. But no, it was like, how the heck did you manage to achieve that? So that was, that was how he was, unfortunately. But that was the beginning of a real change for me, a really positive change, because I was in a beautiful environment, although the surrounding area wasn't particularly nice. The school itself, it was like a backwater, Steve. Again, you remember it.
The convent was lovely. Yeah.
The convent was in a beautiful location. It was almost like an oasis, wasn't it? In a desert, really. And I just loved it. I took to it straight away, and there was no bullying. We were in an environment where everybody wanted to learn and was encouraged to learn and rewarded for learning, and that was just fantastic. And that continued on, and then I moved up to the senior school from there to the Rockferry Convent Grammar School for Girls, as it was in those days, and did well academically, right the way through to O level. And then you made an appearance, didn't you, pretty much on the scene as I got to around 15, 16.
Yeah, you were a month and it was 6 days past your 15th birthday when I met you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Way too young. She didn't look that. She looked a lot older, and I didn't know. I was surprised when I was told that.
Yeah.
So I thought I'll have to come back in a year.
And you did.
And I did. Yeah.
And you did.
Yeah.
And I was about to take my O levels, and yeah, something of a distraction, I suppose. It didn't stop me getting them.
No, but that was one reason why your dad didn't want me around, wasn't it? Because it would have stopped you passing your exams. He suggested, and it didn't work, did it? You did pass your exams.
Well, that was the rationalisation that he gave for his reaction to things. I don't think it had anything to do with that at all, to be honest with you. But he could probably see that was the beginning of the separation from the family, from the family constellation, and that was just too threatening for everyone to contemplate. But it was unstoppable.
Yeah, it
was. At the same time.
It was, yeah, it was.
And thank God it was, really. Because we wouldn't be here now together all these decades later.
Yeah, indeed.
So he didn't stop us, and our relationship carried on from there, and the photograph that...
We got engaged, didn't we?
Yes, we did, in secret.
I asked her to marry me within a week of going out with her. I absolutely was sure and certain.
Yes.
And she said yes, so that was it. I was 100% committed.
Yes. Well, it was an instinctive thing again.
Yeah, it was.
To be honest, I didn't have to think about it.
No, not me.
It was just absolutely right.
Yeah.
It could have been wrong. Of course it could, for either of us.
Yeah, yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
But at that time, at that moment in time, there was no doubt.
No, it was magical. I felt it was anyway.
Yes.
I can only speak for myself.
Yes. I think the sad thing looking back is how we had to steal time.
Yeah.
And I would go and see you an awful lot, and your family were fantastic.
Oh yeah, they loved you, didn't they?
Really wonderful.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to go home after that. When the taxi would arrive, or get the bus home, or whatever it happened to be, and it was just a heart sink moment to have to go back to them. And really, I think then I was just biding my time.
Yeah. Funny, we got no trouble from the police, and what I mean by that is not because we did anything unlawful, but with you being 16, and in those days they had to approve of relationships. You couldn't have a second job, you can now. You couldn't have any role in politics, you can now. They had to approve where you lived, and if you were making a serious commitment to someone, particularly a girl of 16, and you're a considerably older individual, they would be on that. And
they would vet you.
Oh yeah, yeah, but they literally, not literally, but embraced her in a protective way right from the start, and that was lovely. And these were older guys. These were the old arse sergeants and above were happy for it, and that was nice. Even though I didn't like the job, to be honest with you, but the fact that they accepted it and there was going to be no attempt to interfere with it, that was great.
Yeah. But those early days, like you say, Steve, before we got married, we had to conceal the engagement. You bought me a ring, and I couldn't wear it when I went home. I had to take it off and,
Your mum knew.
And hide it. She knew,
she was still on
but I couldn't have worn it in front of my dad.
No. She was on side for about, let me see now, from the June to the April.
Yes.
So,
yes.
10 months.
Yeah.
And then it was obvious it was serious, and then that was that.
Yes, so school was okay.
You did really well.
I did, yes, I guess I did. got the requisite amount of O levels and A levels, but as I think I said earlier, there was absolutely no chance of going to university because, of course,
there was that hangover.
there was that hangover from it.
There were other, you did break that spell though before you left school, because you came with me to Bristol, didn't you, when you were 16?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's interesting, isn't it, that broke state.
Yeah, the association with me, because we were travelling around together.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But had I, and I guess this is instructive, isn't it? Had I been back in the bosom of the family, so to speak, I would have probably reverted back to not being able to travel. So it just shows how you can create a completely different psychophysiological state and so on, to the point that they can actually break free from these things.
Yes.
So that was absolutely key, and obviously my relationship to you has been central to the whole of my adult life.
Thank you. And before.
Yes.
When you were 16.
Yes, I know, but I know it's not sort of strictly adult, but it's moving in that direction.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't it? Yeah. So left school 18, and at that time unemployment was really high.
It was terrible. Yeah.
Terrible for people to find work. I know it's bad now, but it was really bad then, in the early 80s, and even with qualifications it made no difference. And I was thinking about maybe going into the fire service, like my dad had done and my sister had done, just following suit. And because we had a home and we were about to get married, weren't we, relatively soon, that I should really have a job.
Well, you left school in the summer of 1980,
yes.
And we got a house in 1980.
Yes, yeah. So we had it before we got married and moved in, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah. So we needed an income.
Yeah.
That was the long and short of it, and so I joined the civil service for 5 years. Started as a clerical assistant, right on the sort of bottom rung of the ladder.
Yeah.
And eventually made it to clerical officer, and never liked it, never really adapted to it. I mean, I quite enjoyed the contact with the public, because it's public service, unlike my colleagues who tended to treat people as if, they just something on the bottom of their shoe.
Well, remember, in 1980, that was also when we both started working with John Cain.
Yes, we did.
So you were doing that, and you were basically doing literally hands-on work with him and me. We were his assistants, weren't we?
That's true.
And you were doing that for 5 years whilst you're in the civil service, and I was up at Arrow Park Hospital doing psychotherapy.
Yes, you were.
And you'd already developed an interest in Carl Jung as well before you left school.
Yes.
So all of those factors were in place.
All of those things were there, and so there was definitely a general trend in that direction, and anything to do with depth psychology and healing, and wanting to work with people in that way. But we had to pay our way, and so I was in the civil service for 5 years, and then eventually there was a bit of a crossroads, or I had a choice to make about what I wanted my future to be, and I had a choice between doing occupational therapy and maybe doing a degree in art.
Well, you also looked at psychology as well.
Yes, I did. I had a place.
You did have a place, and you moved towards occupational therapy, which is the right thing, because that was in alignment with everything else.
Well,
that we were
strangely
doing.
enough, now I'm so glad I made that choice.
Yeah.
I really am, because it was so. Maybe didn't appreciate it fully at the time, but it was so broadly based, and it kind of it ticked all the boxes. It allowed me to work in a therapeutic way with people, and there were so many areas that I could work in post qualification as well. Because there's basically several main areas for occupational therapists to work in, and there's the physical side, psychological side, psychiatric side really, mental health. Paediatrics, working with children, lots of different areas that you can go into.
They're basically rehabilitation therapists, aren't
they? They are.
Yeah. And you did specialise in psychiatry, and that was part of what you
Yes.
were aiming to do.
Well, I knew.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't let you specialise early on. They want you to get
but
like a general foundation.
Yeah, once you got through that,
Yes.
that period.
Yes, I was determined that was the direction I was going to go in. I kind of tolerated the other areas where I did my placements and got my experience, but I knew for sure that it was going to be psychiatry finally.
Yeah. And you got me away from psychology, didn't you? I was doing the Open University
That's right.
just before I left the police, and then I went to what became Liverpool John Moores University, and I jumped over onto occupational therapy because of what Pauline was doing and the bandwidth of medicine that was available, medical experience.
Oh yes, that was just, that part of it was fabulous. I mean, it just allowed us to underpin everything with science.
It did.
And that's been there.
Oh, absolutely.
From then till now.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had my interest in neuroscience that I got through the Open University. That was really, really important, but I couldn't have got the practical experience if I hadn't gone into the hospital setting as a part of OT training.
Yes.
And of course, you got in touch with the Charing Cross Hospital people, and then that was the absolute watershed. I think really it decided once and for all where we were going to go. Personally, that got me away from Carl Jung as an exclusive path.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember Don Bliving, the psychologist.
Oh yes.
Yeah, who was a friend of John Kane's. In fact, he was one of the people who were brought in from the outside, if you like, to test him. People used to come from all over the world, parapsychologists, even Buddhist teachers from Japan, I remember being there.
Yes, I remember that.
And he was very, very helpful in terms of helping Pauline to orientate yourself towards a career.
Yeah.
I think probably under the influence of the relationship to me, she probably was veering towards academic psychology, and that was the direction I was going towards, presumably clinical psychology, although I'd been disillusioned in that, having worked in the hospitals at that point for 3 or 4 years with them, and I found them to be mostly a bunch of bozos who didn't know what they were doing, and that kind of put me off. But Don Bliving was great. He'd done an awful lot of psychotherapy training in America. He was financially very, very successful, had a huge house, which would be probably worth around $1 million now, local, I would say. Amongst other things, apart from being a psychotherapist and a counselling psychologist, he was an occupational psychologist.
Yes, he was.
And John Kane put us in touch with him, and he decided to test Pauline's IQ and aptitude, and it turned out she was pretty high up. She was in the top, in some metrics, the top 2 or 3%. And he basically said, well, have you thought of occupational therapy? Which neither of us had, to be honest. It's a pretty obscure profession. Not many people really switch on to it. It's in the shadow, I think, of physio, which is a shame because it's far broader. So, Don Bliving encouraged us to go for that, which worked for you, didn't it?
I think it worked for me beautifully, really, because obviously I had the interest in psychology, and still have to this day, but it was also immensely practical as well.
Yeah, it was.
So that had a great appeal for me, being a practical kind of person. I think I've said this probably many times before, whilst I can have an appreciation of theory and theoretical concepts and models, and they're very interesting and so on, they only interest me insofar as the application of them with real people. And so again, you see that through line, I think, with me, of if it's not connected to people, it doesn't do a lot for me.
No.
Although I do value it in and of itself, of course I do, but for me personally, it has to have that connection. And that allowed me to establish that, and I think to make a clear decision about my career path at that point. And again, I'm very grateful for that. I can remember doing the tests, and yes, he was obviously very materially successable, but I can remember he didn't have the heating on. And it was absolutely freezing in there, and I thought, if I survive this, then I'm going to be doing pretty well.
And he had this very arsey girlfriend, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
yes,
very
he
sort
did,
of creative and arsey.
Yes,
and
that's a good...
he knew Carl Rogers personally. He was like a friend of Carl Rogers, and he was into the humanistic and transpersonal dimensions on things. And like a lot of them, he kind of liked liked Jung, but he shied away from him. He was a bit too much LSD trip type.
Yeah.
But overall, really nice guy.
Yes, he was.
Very supportive.
And obviously it was useful to be able to do that, and it gave me enough information. It gave me a compass, really, on myself, and a way of looking at myself objectively that allowed me to make an important decision. I started my OT career properly in acute psychiatry, and the actual for those days, really, the actual department itself was very well set up. It was a huge department. It was by the time I left, it had kind of contracted down to nothing, because the psychiatric nurses had kind of taken over, and they'd encroached on it, on the rooms, and on the various activities that had previously been available to people. But for its day, it was quite something, really. It literally had a dedicated room for each activity, so you could do creative art, you could do pottery, you could go into a classical music group. There was everything under the sun. Country dancing, yoga, relaxation. Yes, we had an OT kitchen where people could go and do anything from baking to cooking a full 3-course meal. We had socials that we used to go back for in the evening for people, and we'd have discos. We'd have all kinds of things.
And you brought the psychosystems model in.
I did.
And hypnotherapy in. And the Charing cross model introduced them all, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Against initial resistance from the psychiatrists.
Oh, a lot of resistance.
Including our dearest friend of all. Did I name him?
Yes, go on.
Rafiq Mahmood, who was the chief psychiatrist for the district, and who didn't like me because I was pinching all his private students off him. But there you go.
Well, you know...
His private patients, beg your pardon.
Yes. I mean, hospitals have hierarchies, as everybody knows, and I wouldn't say I went in there naively, because, you know, I wasn't like a kid going in. I was married, I'd done other things before, but, you know, for anyone who tries to create change within a system that is kind of so well set, is going to have problems. But I couldn't get away from the idea of advocating for people. Again, it's that connection to people, and I didn't like a lot of the practices. I didn't like how people were treated. I can remember one incident very clearly with a male OT, actually, who was working in the department, and he was probably a little bit older than me, and had been there obviously a bit longer. Do you remember him, Steve?
Got a great memory.
And well, I know. And I can remember him scolding me for giving a patient a cup of tea outside of the regular, you know, tea giving activity, shall we say. And I remember thinking, what the, you know, that is just the lack of compassion. And it was like, oh, well, you know, if you do that kind of thing, then you know, you're going to reinforce some kind of negative behaviour in that person. You really shouldn't be doing it. And you know, it really admonished me for doing it. And I remember thinking, you know, bleep, bleep, bleep.
You were junior in status at that time, but you later became...
I did.
The manager.
I did. Well, I got a couple of promotions in relatively quick succession, and he moved on eventually, left anyway. But I've never forgotten that. No. And I thought, why do you even want to do this kind of work? What's it about for you? Is it just a power relationship? Probably. Being able to push vulnerable people around. And, you know, I always had the view that the people who were in there were far more interesting than the staff. Or any of the consultants, the psychiatrists. The other thing was ward rounds. Hated ward rounds because of the way that people were treated. And we'd all be sat there, and you know, each patient would be waiting for their turn. They'd be called in individually to be sat amongst us, and then to be discussed as if they weren't there. And then some nurse will come along maybe 15 minutes into the the ward round with a tray for the consultant with the tea and the biscuits and all of that, and they wouldn't be shared around, put it that way. And the patient who had joined her would not be offered a drink or anything for that matter. Well, they would have had one, wouldn't they, according to this guy earlier on in the day, so why should they want another cup of tea? But that stuck with me, the inhumanity of that, and I hated it, and I thought, I'm going to either have to fight from within from these people, and I did for a time.
You did.
Or I'm going to have
just
to
make an
leave.
observation.
Of course you can.
But that's a through line for you.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
caring for people in that way.
Yes.
That's the same girl who was the little girl in the street who was putting plasters on people's knees when they fell over.
Yes.
And you still have that caring element. It's so fundamental to your nature.
Yes.
It's never gone.
No, it's never gone. And I cannot abide injustice. I just cannot stand people being treated in that way. I think it's disgusting. It actually disgusts me to my core. And I knew I either had to try from within, make changes if I possibly could. But then again, a lot of the things that I did with respect to the model, I mean, I did my best to get it accepted within the unit.
The psychosystems analysis
This is a
model.
psychosystems analysis.
And I'm sorry to interrupt again,
okay.
but for those guys who are training with us, who are on the Discord, there's a whole raft of paperwork from that time, and you can actually see the programs that Pauline was putting together, what was in it, and the liaison with Charing Cross, bringing in the Jungian elements. And this was against the pressure of the NHS at the time, who was trying to squash anybody who was innovative, who was creative, and who was for people. Yeah. Sorry about putting that context in.
No, it's okay. That's absolutely fine. So I fought for as long as I could, until I realised that I couldn't make any more of a difference, and I couldn't get the people I needed on side to come with me on that journey. And I thought the only thing I can do at this point, because my own health is going to give if I don't try and deliver this in some other way. And that was the point at which I gave my notice and left. And we were at a point where we were already thinking that we wanted to work together.
Oh, that had been happening for ages.
It had,
by the time,
but we were in a position to make it happen.
Well, we were. I mean, I'd already started in the medical centres.
Yes, you had.
And then you were coming in and doing some time in there outside of your hospital
That's
work,
right,
and then you swapped over
I
completely.
did, yes, that's right. Yeah. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, because that's something that you always wanted.
Oh, I did. It did indeed, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she used to say that it was going to happen, and I wondered how that would be. And for a while, I thought it might be within the occupational therapy environment, but no, it wasn't to be.
Yeah. And that was great. And we did a lot of good work together, I think, in medical centres.
Oh, we did.
But again, you're still hitting up against the system.
Yeah.
And you have to try and do your best to make space within that system. And we did as much as we possibly could.
We did.
But it's very, very hard, isn't it? We spend a lot of time, because we cared so much.
Yes, we did.
Coming up against all sorts of difficulties from the powers that be.
Yeah. We had
but not giving up.
No, we had the NHS powers that be, and there was that, and then there was the professional matters as well, which was mainly my field. I was.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Out fighting that, although Pauline was with me through that. Her focus has always been people.
Yeah.
And the immediacy of that contact. I was absolutely for that, but I guess it might be either a feature of type or even a masculine-feminine difference that I was concerned with building the structures in the world that had to do with developing our particular approach. Yeah. But yeah, we pushed hard on that and established training. We got top people from all around the world, all the Charing Cross people as well backing us, and beyond them, all the top figures within ISARP, which included senior consultants from all over the world, Papworth, the top people from Papworth, Barts Hospital. Our use of capnography, of course, was central to that, and we pioneered its use in primary healthcare.
We did. Very effectively.
Very, very effectively.
Yeah.
And of course there was Franz Jung as well.
Yeah.
And all of the connections, the amount of pressure we were under just went like that, didn't it? And it was incredible. Within I would say 18 months of starting in primary healthcare, we'd seen well over 1,000 people face to face. That was the kind of pressure that we were under. We would start like the early hours of probably 8 o'clock in the morning, and we might still be there 8 o'clock at night.
Oh yes.
Because at one point we were working 5 medical centres, and we were moving between them to get as much experience as possible, taking on the hardest cases, and we got a reputation being able to sort out pretty much anything that the others couldn't sort out.
Yes.
So we got a lot of resistance against us for that too, didn't we?
We did, absolutely we did. But we saw it as a challenge.
We did, yeah.
And I think this is where there's quite a bit of overlap in terms of our values, really.
Oh yes.
Because if either of us are challenged with something, we rise to the challenge.
We do, we do. We always
We've both got, although we're polar opposites, we've both got that in our nature in common.
We share the values, don't we? And
yes.
we've shared the journey.
Yes, yeah, and to want to advocate for people.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the time that took, really. I mean, it was probably the best part of, I think about before Gareth came on the scene, for example.
Yeah, it's good 4 years solid,
yeah,
wasn't it? Up until when he was born.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And all the politics as well as the professional practice.
Yes, that were going on in tandem with everything else.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, well, there were a number of things that probably made us delay having a family a little bit.
Yeah.
I had a lot of stuff to work through, probably more than you had, Steve, to be fair. Again, my mother instilled in me that, even right into my 20s, that I couldn't have children of my own, because then I wasn't her child anymore.
Yeah.
There was all of that going on between us.
Yeah.
And I can remember even when I was married, we bumped into a friend of hers in a shop, and she said, introduced me as, this is my baby, and she's just got married and broken my heart. And it kind of tells you everything you need to know, really, about our relationship.
Yeah, well, she wouldn't speak to me at all for years.
Oh, no, she wouldn't. You didn't exist.
I didn't exist.
No.
I was literally not there.
No.
It was astonishing.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was absolutely dreadful, really, in many ways. Yeah. But these things cut deep.
Yeah, they do.
And for me, it went so far as, in the same way that I think you said, Steve, during your personal myth, that you held the belief that you couldn't drive.
Yeah.
Well, I equally held the belief that I couldn't be a mother, that I couldn't have children, that I wasn't capable of it. No one could do a better job than her.
I knew that was nonsense.
Well,
just so you know, I knew that was nonsense.
Thank God you did. And instinctively, I probably knew it was nonsense as well. But nonetheless, these things, they take hold.
They do.
And I believed that for a long, long time. And so it allowed me to develop myself professionally. It meant, obviously, that came later in life for me. Fortunately, not too late. And it was a bittersweet time, I think, because had I not had that suggestion from her, I probably could have enjoyed being pregnant and going through that process of having children in a much more enjoyable way.
Yeah,
I could have embraced it more in a way that was...
Yeah.
It could have been a happier time, I think I'm saying.
I mean,
it was happy.
Yeah,
it was.
I know what you mean.
I don't wish to give the impression that it wasn't.
Yeah,
but
I know what you mean. The thing that was missing was that, in a Jungian sense, the archetypal relationship to the lineage of mothers.
Yes,
because she
definitely.
didn't give you that. Whereas, Pauline I went with her, went down to London to see who was then a very, very famous international consultant and sort of celebrity, actually, wasn't he? Michel O'Donnell, who does the water births. And for our first child, we were planning on doing that one to make everything just right. And we're going to have a home birth. And I went through everything with her as much as I could, and she had all that love and support and the confidence to do it, and everything was just right, except for the fact that her mother was not there for her and didn't confirm her as a mother in lineage of other mothers. That was a terribly wounding, or it could have been, had Pauline not been as strong and as developed as she was as an individual. It was a dreadful, dreadful woman, really, for doing that. To you.
Yes. Well, if it forces you to connect
Yeah.
with the archetype.
Yeah.
And to find real ways of doing that out there in the world. If it's not there in your relationship to your own biological mother, you can still access it. That's an important thing to say, really.
Yeah.
For any other woman or any other mother or mother to be, that if you don't have it within your personal experience for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that you can't still access it in other ways.
No.
And I thank God for that. Really, because that is such a resource.
It is.
And probably why I said at the very beginning that in some ways I felt and still do feel more of a connection to my mum's mum than I do to my own.
Yeah, she was fine.
She was.
We liked her a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, when Gareth was born, I hope you don't mind me saying this, it should have been a home birth, but there was a slight complication that meant that it would be safer to go to the hospital.
Yes.
When we got there, you were given an epidural.
Yes.
That went a bit further up than it should have done, and it seemed as if she was having difficulty.
Like I couldn't breathe.
Like she couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
But because I was monitoring the capnograph there, and I could let her know what the figures were and reassure her.
Yes.
And that was because of our training from Charing Cross.
Yeah.
And the consultant anaesthetist there was, what? You know what a capnograph is? And we were having a conversation about capnography and about the psychological application thereof in general medical practice. And the psychological elements of it whilst Pauline was giving birth. And I think he was more interested in that than he was in monitoring his own instruments, but fortunately I was keeping an eye on them for you, which was useful.
Yeah.
So that again is another index of how far back it goes, really.
The capnography, yes, the significance of it, and like you say, the medical use of it in operating theatres. It's well understood, isn't it?
And your values and her waveform were fine and absolutely healthy, and I could communicate that to her.
Yeah, which is clearly a very valuable thing in what was, I suppose, a bit of an emergency situation, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so Gareth burst into our lives, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
The child, the baby, the child who never slept.
Oh, yeah.
And it was 3 years.
3 years, wasn't it? Yeah, before he slept through.
I think I got up to him every night, literally, for 3 years before he started to settle down. Yeah. And again, in retrospect, I think we could probably say some of that was probably down to his now established psychological type. I mean, we believe him, certainly in a functional sense, to be an INTJ. And he had always as a child, had a rich inner world, a rich imaginal world, the world of intuition. Yeah. And he's still like that now. Yeah. And to kind of, fast forward a little bit to him starting school, for example, he was in a world of his own, wasn't he, from the get-go?
He was.
And we tried absolutely everything to settle him in mainstream school, and he wasn't going to have it.
No.
No matter what we did.
To go back to those first 3 years, we actually were on a rota, weren't we?
Oh, yes. You mean the split nights?
Split nights for 3 years. I'd take the end half, wouldn't I?
Yes, I think I kind of did into sort of the early hours.
Yeah, and then I would stay up, basically stay up all night, and then we'd go in, we'd actually take him with us, not into the consulting room, but we'd leave him with the receptionist in the medical centres, wouldn't we, while we went in.
You'd give him a bottle while we went and did some work.
Yeah. But he was very, very physically active, wasn't he?
Oh, yes.
Incredibly, and very, very bright. Extremely bright.
Well, you'd spend half the night watching Ladies by the Sea with him, wouldn't you too? I'm not sure what the relevance of that was, but
it was all that was on. There was that, and then Barney.
At that time of the night. And Barney, yes. Oh gosh, he loved Barney.
That's all we had. There was no internet then.
No, that's
so we were stuck with whatever was on the telly.
Yes. Yeah. But he had a thirst for knowledge and a breadth of interest.
Spoke very early, walked very early.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did indeed.
Loved the physical environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you taught him lots of things, didn't you? You did a lot of imaginal play with him. I remember in those early days. You were very involved with him.
Yeah.
And he's still in that rich inner world.
He is,
even now, at nearly 26, isn't he?
Yeah.
He can't. And we were laughing the other day, really, because we thought it might be quite an imaginative thing to do a bit of a spoof on types.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Didn't we? Just
Yeah.
just for kind of like a humorous thing.
Yeah.
And we're saying probably for him, for some INTJs at least, that he doesn't seem to have any kind of sense of what happens from sort of the waist down. So if things fall on the floor.
Yeah, by that she means moving in space.
Yes, I do, moving in physical space.
Yeah, it
yes,
doesn't
I
mean
don't
the
mean
other
anything
thing.
rude. No, I don't
It's
mean
got
anything rude.
nothing to do with no fat.
No,
Not
not
fat.
no,
It's got
no,
to
no,
just
not
being able
at all.
to navigate without hitting anything.
So yes, yeah. He's on the clumsy side, isn't he? And he doesn't always see things that are in front of his face.
Unless he's concentrating. He was a very good kart racer.
Oh,
he used
yes.
to get
when he's focused,
lap records and all sorts of.
Fabulous.
He was really, really good. Whatever he's interested in, he's extremely good at. And everything else he's not interested in, he's no
goes
good
by
at
the
all.
wayside.
He just falls over and bumps into things because the inner world's more important at that point when he disengages.
So
he's a good lad. He's a really
absolutely.
First class set of morals, values, ethics and so forth.
Yeah. So he was in mainstream school till he was about 9, nearly 10?
Yeah, we had to take him out.
We had to, yes, for lots of reasons really. And that was the beginning of the home education for him. Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah, we would go in and the teacher would say to him on parents' evenings, "What's your favourite lesson, Gareth?" And he would say, "Playtime." And that was it. That was his favourite lesson.
Yes.
And they labelled him as being dyslexic. I think we've mentioned this before.
We have.
And ADHD and all sorts of other nonsense.
Yeah.
And even threatened him on paper to beat him.
We've still got it. Yes, we could
show James. We'll show James.
Yes, we'll give him the report.
That's why I took him out, or I decided he's coming out, not having that.
That was the religious teacher.
That was a religious teacher, yes. A good Christian.
Yes.
Nothing like a good beating, is there, from a good Christian? Yeah. So, anyway, he got a job as a demonstrator at age 9 at Liverpool Museum, Liverpool World Museum. Placements in there.
Well, these are his skulls.
These are his skulls.
That he made.
And what's her name?
We always forget, don't we?
I can't remember her name. Laura Bishop.
Laura Bishop, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Laura Bishop, a Yale PhD, saw his skulls, and she's a senior lecturer in paleoanthropology, or was then, and then said, "Well, I'll give you private lessons at Liverpool John Moores University, age 9 and 10, and he was in there doing it. But he got bored of it.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
That's Gareth all over.
Yes.
That's Gareth all over.
Yes.
But the museum were impressed with him.
Yes, they were.
Very, very, very impressed.
Yeah.
He wasn't with them. But there you go, that's Gareth.
It is, yeah. Yeah. And then if we were to fast forward again, and 6 years later Rhiannon comes along in 2000. Very, very different experience really with her. Where to begin? It's been a tough 20 years, hasn't it, really?
She's got learning difficulties. Goes further than that, though, because of how people have tried to exploit that vulnerability in her to an evil extent, and that's probably as far as we should go on that, I think.
It's a difficult one. I mean, if I go right back to the beginning to when she was born, I mean, I was unwell after the birth, which probably didn't help, but I clearly remember, and it wasn't just a sex-linked difference as in she was a girl and Gareth was a boy. She was very passive from the get-go, and now it kind of, again, looking back all those years, when I think about instincts and instinctive reactions to things, it's more profound for me in a way, because I knew instinctively things weren't right. There was nothing really very obvious at that stage that would have given the game away. But apart from this just general feeling that she was very passive, and there were other babies on the labour ward and they'd be crying and bawling and were just more engaged in life with their own survival, basic survival. And she wasn't like that. No. And, you know, there was some rationalisation, I think, on my part in those early days of that, well, maybe she's just a very relaxed baby. She's just very chilled.
Yeah.
But I always had that feeling that instinctively something wasn't quite right. And over time you realise, don't you, because of contact that you have with health visitors and paediatricians and speech therapists and whoever else becomes a part of your life.
Yeah, and not always in a nice way either, because some of those people were frankly malevolent.
And malignant.
In what they said.
Yes, they were.
What they implied.
Yeah.
For me, anyway, personally, it'd be too difficult to go there.
To talk about it, yeah.
For example, she couldn't even say a name till she was, 9? Or was it 11?
It was very late.
It was very, very late. She couldn't even say her own name. And we took the option to homeschool her. We didn't want her to be exposed to certain things. That didn't stop people trying to exploit her.
No, that's for sure.
People who should have known better.
Yeah.
And well, there you go. So we've had to fight to protect her basically from the moment she was born.
We have.
But the local education authority actually said that we performed miracles with her to get her as far as we had. Given the starting point, they didn't expect it was possible for her to get as far as we had, and they actually used to refer people to us, didn't they?
They did, yes.
As a model of what home education could be, because of what we did with Gareth, and because of what we subsequently did with Rhiannon. But she's a very valuable, in our view, human being, a really good and decent person, and that's valuable in and of itself. But the worst thing has been the fact that we have had to protect it as much as possible, or as much as we've had to.
Yes.
It shouldn't have been the case.
No, absolutely not. And one of the photographs that we have chosen really to show here is it's the one of her with Matt.
Oh yeah, in the film.
In the film.
Yeah. The Lilith movie, anyway.
Yes.
The pre-production stills for Lilith. Yeah.
There is so much summed up in that image.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, the need that girl had to be protected.
Yes. To that extent, because she's so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And yet so loving and so gentle.
Yeah.
Had she been normally developed, that would have been difficult enough.
Yeah.
For anyone who's sensitive, it's a tough world out there.
It is.
But if you're that way and you have learning difficulties, it's a bit of a double whammy. So for me, that in particular, that photograph. Where Matt and Matt is a fabulous guy in real life.
He is, yeah.
Never mind in terms of his acting ability, but you know it's almost as if that person existed out there for her that could protect her in that way and ensure that she remains safe and ensured her survival. Well, that would be a wonderful thing, obviously the real world's very different to that. But it just sums up that desire.
It does. It's an archetypal thing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I mean, he's obviously he's playing a character there, but he's a man of action. He's a moral man, and a guardian and a protector, and it's an animus thing as well, isn't it? It's an animus story.
Yeah.
And it's for me that's a very moving image.
Yes, it is. It is.
Very, very moving.
Because that character, if he were real, there'd be a lot of dead people around at the moment.
Yes.
For the ones who've decided to pick on her vulnerabilities. Yeah. A lot of people who were in positions where they should have been protecting her and people like her. That battle is ongoing against people like that. Enough said on that, but that battle is not over, and I'll never give up on it.
No, neither of us will.
No. But
she is a wonderful human being, but very, very vulnerable. Yeah. And I think once I started to realise the extent of the difficulties that she was likely to have, it engendered in me a kind of a fierceness, really, that I probably hadn't hitherto experienced. I think the thing for me, in particular with Rhiannon, and again looking back with hindsight, and also in terms of how our model is developed, our model of practice, and we're leaning more and more towards instincts as we go along clinically. Yeah. It's just how much when you have a child with learning difficulties or special needs, whatever you want to term it, just how much your instincts are rallied.
Yeah.
And I think back to early days when I take her to play areas, for example, which is, you know, a very strange environment, really. It's almost like some kind of zoological experiment, really, where it engenders instincts in you. Well, for some people it does. Some parents are just happy to sit and thumb their mobile phone, but for others who aren't set that way and they're concerned about the well-being of their children, they tend to be a little bit more engaged with what's going on. And I felt that particularly with Rhiannon, the way it draws on, I think I said earlier, that kind of fierceness in you as a mother, because there was so little she could have done to prevent herself from being harmed, either, you know, verbally or physically. So I probably spent most of that time bobbing up and down from my seat, and
I remember,
you probably remember it well, Steve, too. And it's such a primitive thing. It really brought it home to me, having her and still having her, because of course she's still with us. And I've thought about it a lot too, because even within the context of the special needs community, there are so many different ways of being learning disabled, and there's a lot of friction between people.
Well, there's a hierarchy
as well. There is a hierarchy.
Without a doubt. It's probably not right to say what that is specifically,
you don't need to.
There is one condition, if you like, which is so favoured and so over the top, and yet it's not even the majority within the minority as such, is it? But,
that's right.
You know,
yeah.
Still, never mind.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. But you do get that, and obviously on an ongoing basis too, because she's 20 now, but she's a vulnerable adult.
Yeah.
I still don't feel any less protective towards her.
You can't, because of what's out there and
No,
what we've had to fight against.
Absolutely, and we have done, and you have in particular, you've done absolutely everything you possibly could do for her as a father.
Yes. Short of drastic action.
Well, that's
right. Grand gesture.
Within what's socially acceptable, of course.
Yeah, well, beyond that,
but,
you know, because I could only have gone to the grand gesture, and the thing about that is you can only do that once. Yeah, because you literally shoot your bolt once you've done that, and you can't do it again. So there's a limited number of targets you can take down unless you have a portable tactical nuclear device with sufficient radius to take out the entire target. Yeah.
But it's the thing about archetypes too, in so much as you can't, whilst they kind of sum up a situation. Yeah. They're not necessarily something that can be followed through on. No, they don't. You know, because you have to live in the real world. Yeah, indeed. And with somebody like Rhiannon, you soon realise that there's a difference between what you might want to do, and what you can do, and what's you know, viable to do. In a kind of a moral or an ethical sense. So it really does bring it home to you. And there have been times in the past, I'll be quite honest about it, and again, this is instincts, and when you get down to the level of instincts, in some ways you have to forgo the moral arguments about things, because they just insist themselves. They're a priori. They are a priori. To morals, and they a priori to so-called archetypes as well. They are, absolutely they are. One of the problems with so-called archetypes, and we've actually met face-to-face institutional evil. We know what it is, and when people go on about, you know, archetypal evil, and it's all theory, they've never experienced it. It's a little off-putting. And I'm talking about therapists or so-called therapists that discuss things like that. But the thing about archetypes is they do distract, because they offer, it's like if you're hungry and you're given a meal, that's a nice meal. It doesn't stop you being hungry again soon. Instincts, hunger, you can call that an instinct, certainly the drive to eat,
they need to be completely satisfied for survival reasons.
They do.
And archetypes, which are essentially just collective fantasies, and we know this because we're in the film industry, we're in the business of archetypes and narratives. We know the difference between them and instincts, and behind every archetype there's one or more instincts, and that's why very often people react to the same archetype differently, isn't it? It's because it's how it manifests itself in life. Excuse me.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, obviously it's something I would never do.
I know,
of course
I
would never do.
I know.
But I understand why some people do it.
And what you're getting is the frustration of instinct being powered through the limbic system into an archetypal representation of a solution, which then becomes safely ducted into a fantasy image of our daughter being protected. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the archetype, but it doesn't satisfy.
No,
because it doesn't. It does not satiate instinct.
No.
It's meant to, in the same sense as say you eat a meal and then it's gone and you need another one. And that's one reason why these narratives exist in the way that they do, and why archetypal characters are not real. Instincts are 100% real because they reflect real life. Yeah, the instincts are a priori to archetypes, and Carl Jung himself said that the archetypes are the self-portrait of instincts. Instincts create archetypes. It's not the other way around. And the latest discoveries in neuroscience showing this, there is an emotional layer of consciousness which is itself a priori to cognition. That's deeply rooted in our ancestral past, and that's the direct route that you get down to instincts and whether those instincts are being satisfied or not. That's why we get depressed reactively very often. That's because instincts are being compromised, not because of archetypes. When people feel that their life lacks meaning, the meaning of lacking meaning is that you're not in place socially. You don't have your rank, you don't have your survival guaranteed.
Yes.
That's what causes, not because of some bloody archetype. The archetype is the fantasy that's meant to act as a container to deal with the emotion whilst a situation is resolved, temporarily usually. And this is why I say that basically archetypes just do that. It's like you have a meal when you're hungry. And even at the level of a soap opera, you get that where people get hooked into soap operas because it's like having a dream.
Yes.
And dreams are like archetypes. Jung was right, it's the same thing, but fundamentally the drive, the behavioural drive is instinctive, and it's only when you're in an absolute... I have been in real life threatening. I've been through all. I've dealt with death. I've dealt with terrible violence, and there's a dissociation involved at those times that separates you from any fantasy about what life is.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same with this. If you have a child who is under that kind of threat, and the institutions themselves are corrupt at an instinctive level.
Yes.
Themselves, that their instincts are corrupted. There's no point going about archetypes then. It's a complete pile of shite and nonsense. And when you work therapeutically with people, nobody asks about archetypes unless they've been exposed to the idea that they even exist. They come in and it's an instinctive issue for them, a deeply emotional issue, and that's instinctive. And then there's the complexes that form around those. So these are fundamentals, aren't they?
Absolutely they are. I mean, there's no doubt that as a human being she has her own intrinsic worth.
Oh yes, without a doubt.
I mean, she is a wonderful young woman in
very
many
loving,
ways.
very loving.
Very loving and very creative.
Very creative
actually.
And loves and enjoys life as much as she can.
And for somebody who, as I think you've said, Steve, before, has been so maligned, really, she's done well. I mean, she has receptive and expressive speech disorder.
Yeah.
She has global delay in other areas of her development.
Yeah.
But she is a creative person.
She is.
And she can read and write now. We've taught her to do those things.
Yeah.
She's left-handed, which was just another added difficulty that she had. So
But she's creative. She actually do quite a bit with technology. Actually, she's very good with computers.
She's a good photographer.
Very good photographer. Yeah. But she was actually hated from the moment by others. From the moment she was conceived, and certain parties knew that Pauline was pregnant, the hate against her started immediately.
It did, yeah.
And that was within the psychotherapy field, actually. It was unbelievable, the malignancy that drew to her. Talking about light attracting shade. She's such a good person, but she attracts darkness towards in a destructive way. Yeah. It's malignant, malevolent, horrible. Yeah. There you go. But again, that's part of life, and we engage with it as we always have.
We do indeed, and I think through creativity, with for ourselves and with both our children through the home education, and probably through that actually brought me back to my art rather late in life. Sadly, but nonetheless I was able to, because I was doing so much with them. We all sat together doing various things.
You did.
That it got me back in touch with that again. I started to draw and to do portraiture with what time I had available. And if there was anything maybe my mum did give me or carry over from that relationship, it was probably the artistic drives. And I mean, she was a fantastic artist, actually, to be fair, in her own right. I mean, she went to the Leeds School of Art in Birkenhead, where it was quite a prestigious thing to do that. And she did a lot of still art. She used to make her and bind her own books. And sadly, I think I've probably said in the past, she decided to destroy everything. She just binned it. She had a habit of doing that.
She destroyed photographs from your childhood.
My wedding photograph.
Your wedding photographs. She burned them.
Yeah.
Her own set, not ours.
Yes, fortunately.
That was how unpleasant a person she was. Really, deep within.
Yeah.
But there's probably some instinctive issue there for her, a lack of fulfilment, which caused her to maladapt towards you.
Yes.
And to try and cripple you psychosocially.
Yeah.
It's just dreadful. What people do to one another is awful.
And we often say to each other now, because most of these people are gone.
Yeah.
Dead and gone.
Yeah.
They're no longer in our lives, and we say, what was all that about? What was it for? What did it achieve? Nothing.
Nothing, no.
Yeah.
No.
But you must never give up.
No, never.
Never give up. No matter, how close to the edge you feel you are, or if you're on the floor, if you can still get up again, stand up again and try again, because we say this so often, but it's true, your genomic potential wants you to do that. It's still there. It was there at the beginning. It can be there decades down the line again, still asking of you to fulfill that. And in a way, you have an obligation to do. You have an obligation to yourself to do it. And people can overcome all manner of things, can't they? They really can.
They can.
All sorts of challenges.
One reason why we're therapists, and we're still therapists, is for that. Then making a difference in somebody's life is such a privilege to see that happen.
Absolutely,
Just
it is.
One more grain of sand on the scales to balance out the horrible evil it is in this world.
Yeah. A lot of that is ordinary, everyday evil.
Oh yes.
It's not the big stuff.
No.
Is it?
No,
because most people don't ever encounter that. No. They're not challenged to that extent. But for me, it's that ordinary, everyday evil that people, project onto one another and try and harm one another with. It's just awful, but worth fighting at the same time.
We are. The creativity is important as well.
Yeah. Well, there's an instinct for you.
Absolutely. So much comes from that.
Yes, it does. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an instinct to create. And out of that emerge archetypal images. Exactly what Carl Jung said.
Yes.
The instincts are the creators of images, because archetypes are the self-portraits of instincts, and you see that in the creative process.
Yes.
It's so clear.
You do. And that's something that kind of returns me to my occupational therapy days, really, with the badge that we wore was the phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have it somewhere to hand. I thought I did. It was over there. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to see that on camera. It's obviously it's very, very small, and you know, I keep that to this day because we can all do that. We can all rise from the ashes, and we might have to do it many times, but it can be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And we have repeatedly. We haven't covered everything, have we?
No, by no means, no. Yeah.
But there you go.
Yeah.
Trees grow on growing.
They do. So we've found our home in therapy, haven't we? I think we'd be hard pressed really to do anything else, given
that and the creativity of the films. But we've always,
yes, of course. But for us, they're connected.
We've always connected them, and that's part of the promise we made to Franz Jung as well.
Yeah.
And it's a healing thing to facilitate creativity for others. And it's a marvellous way of doing that.
Yeah. And anyone can do that.
Yes.
It's not an elite thing.
No.
It's not a special privilege.
No, it's not.
For a few. Anyone. I mean, Rhiannon's proof of that.
She is.
And whilst we can't obviously share all that on camera now, we have so much of what she's done, of her drawings and her paintings and her modelling and her photography, and she's a
work
testament.
On computers.
Yes, her work on computers as well. Yeah.
She edits films, there's all sorts.
She does.
She's really good.
Yeah. She can green screen.
Yeah,
we caught her
can,
doing that once. We didn't even know how she'd worked out how to do it, but she had.
Did,
yeah, quite extraordinary. Yeah.
Thank you for watching this episode of Jung To Live By. If you haven't already, make sure you download our free PDF for integrating your shadow. It includes the most advanced theory on the topic available anywhere on the internet, as well as a full practical breakdown. If you've ever wanted to integrate your shadow, this is honestly the way to do it. Thanks again for watching, and take care.